What's good, everyone? Back here again with another video today. I know it has been a while, but I'm back here now. Today we're going to talk about sedimentary rocks. If you haven't, go check out the last video of me discussing about igneous rocks and how they form and how we ID them. So first, when we're talking about sedimentary rocks, we want to talk about how do we start making them. And so first we want to talk about the process of uplifting. Uplifting is the geologic process of land being risen from the ground. Now, this could be a few meters to kilometers. And a good example of uplifting is the Himalayas, or if you're like an East Coast person, the Appalachians. And so, after the tectonic activity uplifts the ground, it will give enough energy for water, ice, wind, depending on what agent, to carry down that eroding process. So there's two types of weathering. There's physical and chemical. Physical weathering is basically the rock being broken down by some physical object, and the chemistry of the rock is not changed. And so a good idea of physical weathering would be biologic. You can see trees, especially here in the, I guess, Blue Ridge Mountains, and you see how their roots are like digging through the rocks. That's a good example of biological. Um, Frost would be water percolating through the rock itself, and during the nighttime hours, the water will freeze and expand, breaking down the rock into more smaller pieces. Now, thermal is not something many people have heard of, but thermal is basically the rock will expand and shrink due to lots of heat being exposed. So let's just say we have like a giant boulder in the desert, um, Death Valley. Death Valley. You know that Death Valley can get hundreds of degrees hot. So that boulder is being cooked, not being melted, but it's being cooked, it's being heated up. And so that boulder will expand. Now, when it becomes nighttime, I'm pretty sure Death Valley gets to like the low 30s. I don't know much about the climate, but let's just use that as an example. That boulder will start to shrink. And so doing that repeatedly throughout the years will cause the rock to break down. Then we have chemical weathering. This is where the minerals in the rock will start to alter due to a chemical reaction. And this could happen due to the presence of oxygen and water. A common one that people know is rust. Rust is actually a agent of chemical weathering. For my people who live in karsty areas, that's actually going to be a term that I will discuss probably in a future video when we're discussing about groundwater. But think of like limestone, chalk, all of these rocks in that nature. And so Tennessee, Florida, some parts of Texas, I'm blinking on others, you have limestone. That's basically your bedrock. And if you have acidic water, that limestone will break down over time. And that's a good example of a chemical weathering process. Now, depending on what region you're living in, you will have either more of a physical weathering process or a chemical weathering process. How I tend to break this down to my students is the fact of if you live in a moist area, so you can kind of think tropical in a sense, then you're going to have more of a chemical weathering. Unlike if you live in a dry climate, that is where we will have more of a physical type weathering process going on. And so we're kind of going back to the igneous video, so definitely go check that back out. This is a stability charts of minerals, and it kind of looks like Boeing's reaction series, which is kind of basically based off of. And so basically this chart is describing, hey, if you're an ultramafic mineral like olivine or augite or a calcium rich plagioclase feldspar, you are less stable and you will be broken down more easily. Unlike something like mica, like muscovite or quartz, they're more stable and it's harder to like erode those minerals down. And so I keep mentioning the igneous video. This is how important like the igneous video is. We see that we have a volcano erupting magma and it solidifies to, I'm assuming, basalt. And so after a while, that basalt that's composed of olivine, augite, and some other minerals, it could just vary depending on the magma source, it will be broken down a lot more easy. And so this is how we get our jet black sand beaches. So if you want to go to an area where it's like a beautiful jet black sand beach, go to an area where it's highly ultramafic to mafic in composition. And I believe this is from Iceland or Greenland. It's one of those two. But you can see in the background the culinary basalts, and after a while they will be eroded down into this fine jet black sand. Continuing to how sedimentary rocks will form, like I mentioned for like the past 7 minutes, that the rock will break down into sediment. And that sediment will have to be transported, whether if it's by water, ice, wind, some type of means have to move that sediment, or that sediment will just build up near the source area. After a while, depending on the size of the sediment, which we will hit to later, the sediment will be deposited into like a sheet-like layer. And after a few thousands to millions of years, the rock will lithify, or the sediment will lithify into a rock. So earlier I mentioned, depending on the size of the sediment, it will dictate to how far it will travel. Large pieces of sediment, such as boulders or cobbles or gravels, they won't be transferred that far due to the mass of the material and how much energy is required to move that material. Unlike something small, you can use like a piece of sand. Sand doesn't require that much energy to move compared to a boulder. And so that piece of sand will travel a farther distance compared to that boulder. So if you just see a bunch of sand, just know, hey, this sand has traveled a far distance for hundreds to thousands of years. Unlike a boulder, that boulder probably just fell off that day of, and it still needs more time to get eroded down and become smaller to the point where it's like sand size, silt size, and clay size. Speaking of grain sizes, here are the different grain sizes when we're talking about clastic sedimentary rocks. It ranges from boulders to clays. So boulders and cobbles, you will find those near mountainous areas. Cobbles, pebbles, granules, you will find those in like headwaters of rivers and streams. Sands, you will probably find those in the middle part, probably close to the latter part. And sand, silts, and clays, you will find those in the beach or deep marine environments. So people think sedimentary rocks are boring. Personally, me, I don't. I find them very interesting because specifically for siliclastic sedimentary rocks, I want to just talk about those for right now. They can tell you a little bit about the history of the area, just as igneous rocks. So give Sedimentary Rocks their credit. They're not boring. They're actually pretty interesting when you actually sit down and like study them and understand, hey, what does this mean? There's this concept of maturity and it's not non-mature, but less mature sedimentary rocks. And basically, less mature sedimentary rocks will have a large grain size. They're angular in shape, so they look kind of sharp. And I'm talking about the grain size, not the rock itself. The grains that makes up the rock is in an angular shape, and they're less spherical. Now, when I mean less spherical, I'm not saying like it's like a weird shape. You can have a oval shape, and that's really not spherical. When we mean spherical, we mean like a circle like shape. Mature sedimentary rocks, they will be small in size, they will be rounded, and they will be spherical in shape. Except, there's always an exception in nature, clay. Clay will be designed like a platy type material. So, like this phone case right here, this will be the general shape of how clay will look like. And so this is where we break down our different sedimentary rocks, and this is how you're going to identify them. So first we have breccia. Breccia can be investigated as a sedimentary rock that has a angular shape to it. And as you can see right here, none of these grains that compose this rock are circular or rounded in nature. Breccia is also composed of different mineral or rock fragments. So you can see how there's different color rocks and minerals in this. This is another good hint. Another fact about breccia, they can indicate that they were created by glacier activity. It hints to the fact that they travel a short distance. Another reason why a breccia might form is due to the pressure of a fault zone, or it could be just formed due to landslide material. Then we have breccia's cousin. I probably would say they have like a brother sister relationship, and that's conglomerate. Conglomerate, as you can see, has a rounded size sediment that makes up the rock. It's also made out of different rock and mineral fragments. They can also be formed by glaciers activity, and it indicates a high source or energy region. So you can think of a stream or river near the headwaters of a mountain. Then we have sandstones, and sandstones, they have a whole bunch to them. I have a few pieces of sandstone from Texas, and I have some from North Carolina. They look completely different. And so the first types of sandstones I would like to mention is quartz sandstone. Quartz sandstone has lots of quartz in it, and it has no impurities into it. And you generally will find these at beaches, river channels, possibly like dunes near the beach, and a few other areas. And so a good example of where you might can find like quartz rich sand is, I guess, Cure Beach in North Carolina. Now that's very specific for a region for a rock, but that's actually one of the few places I know. But I can just say beaches from really the whole southeast that will have like quartz rich sand. Next, we have graywacke. You can find graywacke in the upper parts of the Appalachian Mountains or the Blue Ridge Mountains. The graywacke is different because it does contain quartz, It also contains clay minerals and other rock fragments, and is composed of feldspar too. Now, gray rock is also known as dirty sandstone, and it won't be gray, but it will look off color. And you can find these in rivers, coastal regions, especially near trenches. So think of an underwater landslide that's happening. You can get gray whack out of that. Next is Arcos. Arcos is composed of quartz and 25% of feldspar. Now, Arcos will have like this reddish color to it. How I like to explain it to my students, it will feel like a brick and it will look like a brick. And generally, you will get these in arid regions where the little water is there. The reason why arid regions is because, for one, feldspar and water, not a good combo. Feldspar will be eroded down to clay very easily when water is present. So if there's not much water, then feldspar will stand up and survive for the longest. So make sure if you're in a area where you see Arcos, then you can safely say, hey, this area was more likely a arid region. And so here's the difference between the two. You have your Arcosic sandstone, you have your quartz sandstone, you have your gray rock. So quartz sandstone, it looks clean. Quartz sandstone can look to like a pinkish purple color. It just depends on where the quartz or the sand originated from. Here in North Carolina, it's like a white to yellow type color. So that's due to the Blue Ridge Mountains. Gray rock has that dirty color to it, like I mentioned before, and Arcos, it looks like a brick. It's kind of orange in color, and so that's how you can tell between the three of them. Then we have siltstone and mudstone. So if I have some sedimentologists in this comment section, I want you guys to tell the people in the chat down below how you can tell the difference. But just in case none does, I'll tell you guys how. So the best way to tell the difference between siltstone and mudstone is by eating the rock. Yes, eating a rock, even though it will damage your teeth, that's literally the best way to tell them. I believe siltstone, it will feel grindy in your teeth, and in mudstone, it will feel smooth. Now, I don't know who thought of this. I mean, to me, it seems clever, but hey, you gotta do what you gotta do for geology. I mean, we are people who literally lick halite to see, hey, is this really halite? Lastly, we have shell. Shell is a siliclastic sedimentary rock which has a grain size very, 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 very fine. It's flaky. I'm pretty sure all of y'all have seen a piece of shell once in your life, and if not, pause this video, Google it. Shell is, in my opinion, a pretty important sedimentary rock when we're talking about fossils. That will be possibly another video talking about how we preserve fossils, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Clay / shell will break along these laminations, and laminations is basically another word for a flat line. And you only can get shell in extremely quiet water. And so it will take a long time for clay minerals to set out. We have a jar in the geology lab. I wish I could have brought it, but if I shook it up, I would have to reset the timer. But we have clay minerals in this bottle where a lot of them has not set out for like the past, I believe, 5 years. And so it takes that or longer for clay to settle down depending on how far it is and how quiet the water. So deep seas, deep oceans, deep lakes, that's where you will find clay depositing at, and this is where we will find our shell. Next, we have our biochemical sedimentary rocks. Uh, Basically, this is bituminous coal and peat. Peat is just a bunch of plant material, just not liquefy, but kind of harden. And so you can think of, I'm trying to think of that material that gardeners use. Mulch. Think of mulch being set out in the sun and just harden. That's actually the best way I could describe it. You will get these rocks due to poor oxygen areas, and the reason why it has to be oxygen poor is because bacteria doesn't really like to live in that type of water. So yeah, I mean there's certain bacteria that will love that type of water, but in where most cases they want oxygen rich water. And then lastly, you need a little heat and pressure to change the peat into coal. And so on this chart, it shows you what will happen as time progresses. Now, right here, you see this intercitic coal. That's actually considered as a metamorphic rock. I will go into more details about that. But from peat to lignite to bituminous, that is all sedimentary base. Now we have our chemical evaporites. I just came from Texas and I have a few pieces of these. You can pretty easily find these easily in that region. And I'm pretty sure Tennessee, Florida, just anywhere where you can find a dried area. Death Valley is another one. I don't know why I forgot Death Valley. They need to take away my geology degree, but hey, I'm here. I'm here now. But chert is a great example. Another name for chert is flint. That's the thing that you use to spark fires, but these can form down from volcanic ash being concentrated or just microorganisms just dying in a region. In paleontology, we learned these creatures named radiolaria. These were microorganisms made out of silica, and once they hit the bottom of the ocean, they would slowly stack up, and at some point, due to the pressure, it will turn into this siliceous ooze. Now, since it becomes a siliceous ooze, and when that water rises up and the pressure decreases, it will start to liquefy. And so, this is how we get such things as chert and a few other chemical evaporites. Rock salt, rock gypsum, that's another one. I'm surprised calcite isn't on here. I mean, calcite does form in a different way, but in some cases you can get calcite forming from these. But rock salt, rock gypsum, you basically find these in formal. I'm not editing this video. I'm gonna let you guys get the raw thing. But just ancient lakes and sea ways will form these materials. And so I didn't talk about this much in the sedimentary process, but whenever we're talking about like watering down igneous rocks, it will have some sodium, calcium, and other small ions in that rock due to the chemical composition of the minerals. Due to it breaking down easily through weathering, those ions will be carried through water as Groundwater or surface water, just depends. It will reach the ocean, and this is how we have salty water. Then we have our chemical and biochemical. So some of these you might have heard of, such as limestone and chalk. Austin, Texas has a big formation known as the Austin Chalk Formation, which I got a few of my samples from. Limestone, you can find that easily in Tennessee, such as Dolostone. They're basically all the same, just formed different ways. Some might have different chemical composition, such as limestone and dolostone. Limestone is CaCO3, calcium carbonate, while dolostone is MgCaCO3. So that's the difference between the two. And coquina is special, especially here in North Carolina, because there's a coquina formation, I think about a few million years old, right near Cura Beach. And that's basically made out of shell fragments, and you will find these in high energy environments. And so I can show you, look for a bit, I break this. A good example of a sedimentary rock. And so right here, this is, or forgive me, Serpentinian. I can never pronounce the name of certain rocks. But right here, this is mainly made out of calcium carbonate. The calcite right here, the yellow calcite, CaCO3. There's some brown parts that she can possibly, there you go, see, especially boring the calcite. That is aragonite, and that's also CaCO3. Slightly different chemical structure, and then you have the host rock, this gray part, which is made out of limestone, which is also CaCO3. So hopefully you guys picked up how to do these sedimentary rocks. It's a lot when we're discussing about these types of rocks, but once you're like used to it and pick up on like the important parts of grain sizes, or depending on if it's chemical, biochemical, or siliclastic, you can easily break down a rock and then learn like, hey, what was the important history behind this? So this is the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please leave a like down below, comment. I always enjoy seeing comments from you guys. Tell me how to improve. Tell me what topics you want to learn, so on and so on. Because for one, I like making these videos not just for like funsies, but I do want to teach the world the importance of geology and how to understand it. And so next time I'm going to talk about metamorphic rocks. Not my favorite subject, but I mean, it can be interesting, especially when we get into the weeds. But that video itself is going to be pretty intro based. Later on, I will go into more of the weeds about them. But thank you. See you next time. Goodbye.